Yo, what's going on? Hope you're doing well. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to be discussing how to look at your mountain bike as a system in order to optimize its performance, and a new series I'm going to be starting called Shop Talk. A little disclaimer here is that this concept of looking at your mountain bike as a system was not my original concept. It was introduced to me from a Pink Bike article written by Matt Ragg in 2019 about carbon versus aluminum wheels. When I was doing some of my own independent research, kind of deciding what components to choose for some new bike builds, I stumbled across this article and it was really helpful to me. So big thanks to him for writing this. And at the end of the article, he discusses what we're going to discuss in this video, which is looking at your mountain bike as a system and how all the components work together. For me at the time, this was a really eye-opening concept to kind of think about. And yeah, in the time since then, I've spent a lot of time thinking and testing this concept, and I'm really excited to share it with you today. So why is it important to look at your mountain bike as a system? Well, when you're looking to optimize your bike's performance, feel, and just, I would say, developing your bike to your own personal preference, it's really important to think about how all the parts are working together instead of just obsessing over maybe your suspension setup or maybe if there's one particular component you're looking to purchase. In my personal experience, I found that while it is fun to kind of nerd out on those particular things, what I've had the most benefit with in terms of my overall bike feel has been when I'm thinking about the bike as a whole and maybe changing things to affect other parts of the bike. For instance, last year I built up a YT Capra with a custom build, and I had the Race Face Next R wheels, which have since been replaced with the new Aero wheels, which I'll talk about in a minute. I had the Next R carbon handlebar, and it had a carbon frame. And my initial feedback with that bike was that it was quite stiff overall, and that was because it had a carbon frame, carbon wheels, and carbon handlebar. So all the areas where the majority of your compliance on the bike comes from were generally on the stiffer side. So then I switched to an aluminum turbine handlebar, and I kept the same wheels, just dropped my tire pressures a little bit, and kept the frame the same naturally. But the reason for bringing up this quick anecdote is that for me, when I switched the aluminum handlebar, that really improved my overall feel of the bike. I didn't feel like I was getting shaken off, and I could have looked at this two ways. I could have said, okay, this aluminum handlebar is, for one, less fancy and less expensive than the carbon handlebar I had previously. However, the way that I decided to look at it at the end was that although this is maybe a less expensive product, it was giving me the performance benefits that I wanted, and it really improved my ride characteristics of my bike as a whole. The overall moral of the story there is that more expensive and more shiny is not always better. It's super fun to have shiny, expensive parts on your bike. Like, I'm a complete tweaker. I love having expensive, nice stuff on my bike. Like, let's be honest. However, just because it may come at a nice price tag or look nice doesn't necessarily mean it is going to make your bike feel better on the trail, and that is really important to think about when you're building up your bikes. And that takes us to my new bike. This is my new Ibis HD6 that I started building up yesterday, just waiting on a rear wheel to arrive to finish it up, but I am so psyched on this thing, and I just wanted to talk about why I chose the parts that I did. So as we discussed with my Capra that I was riding last year, I had a carbon frame, carbon wheel, and a carbon handlebar to start. I have learned from those, I don't know if I'd call them mistakes, but I've learned from those choices, and I've opted to go carbon frame with the HD6. We're running the aluminum Race Face turbine wheels. I am such a huge fan of this wheel set, and we've got a Race Face aluminum turbine handlebar. So I learned from the bike that I built up last year that was quite similar to this one. I've made some choices that are different for some added compliance, and I'm really excited to test this thing out. Overall, given that I'm running aluminum wheel and handlebar on this thing, I'm assuming it is going to have a much more compliant feel. Now, if it's too wobbly and too compliant, that is definitely a thing. I've ran carbon wheels in the past and liked them on certain bikes for the stiffness, so I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I'm doing a rough equation in my head planning this thing out on what the overall ride feel is going to be like. I'm assuming this is perfect, and I'm really looking forward to getting it out on the trail. But these are the types of things that I think about when planning my bikes. To touch a little bit more on the wheel set choice, I want to discuss the development of aluminum and carbon wheels over the last few years. For full transparency, I used to ride for Industry 9, so that was my past wheel set experience. I rode their aluminum wheel set and carbon wheel set, and then last year I switched over to running the race face wheels. So I've tried a plethora of wheels, and in my time riding for race face, they've had a lot of new products come out. So I've been able to try the old wheel sets and the new ones. And previously I found that I needed to ride carbon wheels to have the lateral stiffness that I wanted. And that was my experience from, many years ago before I was even a sponsored athlete. But that kind of really changed with the turbine wheel set for me. I ran this in a full 29-inch configuration on the Izzo, and as soon as I got on these wheels, I was really impressed. They were the first aluminum wheel set that, especially on a 29-inch rear wheel, I felt like I could really lean into in corners. It wasn't wobbling too much, and it had great vertical compliance as well. And I was just super impressed. Now, Raceface has also just come out with the new Aero wheel set, which is their new carbon wheels, and I haven't tested those yet, but I am so excited to do so. I've heard great things from all the employees at Raceface. The Pink Bike first impressions article that came out makes them sound like they're quite amazing, so I'm really excited to get on that. But the whole point of bringing this up is there's a lot of developments and improvements coming to both aluminum and carbon products to improve their ride feel, and some of what I'm talking about right now is based on some past product generations. There's new products coming out like those Aero wheels that I haven't tried yet. So some of my opinions on this may change in the future, but overall, I'm just discussing based on the experiences that I've had so far in my riding career. So outside of component choice in regards of how your bike works as a system, I really like to look at how your rear derailleur can impact your rear shock's performance. So all derailleurs nowadays have a clutch, which will limit that movement. If I just toss it on here, you can see that makes that way harder. And naturally, you're always going to have your clutch on. And as your rear shock compresses, it stretches your derailleur here. So if your clutch is sticky or whatever, it is going to make your linkage not perform as well. So that's just a good example of how your bike works together. Additionally, say your rear shock is too hard, that's going to put more pressure in your hands and on your front fork, and that balance is going to be off. So there's lots of ways kind of past the initial step of component choice of how your bike is working together in terms of setup. And I really like to think of these things, once I've built the bike and I'm riding it and setting it up, I really like to think about the suspension balance, over time if I'm keeping my clutch serviced, and little things like this that can really optimize the bike's performance. On that same note, one fun thing you can do if you're riding bike park or shuttling or something with repeatable laps is go and ride the same section of trail, one lap with your clutch fully off and one lap with your clutch fully on, and see how that affects your rear shock's performance. I spent a full day at Trestle Bike Park last summer doing this. I thought it was a really fun little experiment, but that gives you a very clear and concise example of how the rear derailleur and rear shock work together. To provide another example, here's my downhole bike. It is a carbon frame, and then we're running the Raceface Atlas aluminum wheels, and then the Atlas aluminum handlebar in a 35 mil rise and diameter. This bike for me is mostly used in a freeride application. I'm not really, riding it in the bike park too much. And because of that, I'm generally looking for a stiffer setup. That's what I prefer on jumps and things. I'm not really smashing bumps. So as you develop your bike, it's really important to think about, what is your intended use. On the HD6, for example, I will be smashing rocks on that thing, so I'm looking for compliance. On this bike, I am looking for a slightly stiffer setup, and although I am running aluminum components, the Atlas lineup from Raceface is a bit on the stiffer side as it is intended for freeride and downhill. Maybe in the future I could even run carbon wheels on my downhill bike. That's something I would be open to. But the moral of the story is that it is important to think about your personal preference and how your riding affects your preference and what you're looking for in your bike. That's all for today's discussion about looking at your bike as a system in order to optimize its performance. I hope you enjoyed this new style of video. And if there's anything that you do with your bike setup that makes a big improvement, I would love to hear it down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.